Good afternoon, everybody. Eric Foster, Vice President of Strategy and Research here at Banks and Company, also our Chief Lobbyist. Now, lobbying is a interesting field and something that, depending upon who you talk to, can be talked about in a positive way, or it can be talked about as, these are the worst human beings in the world that God's ever created. But the thing that I want you all to consider when it comes to lobbying is proactive versus reactive approaches. We at Banks and Company, and it kind of goes back to something that I learned from my grandma Foster a long time ago. My grandma Foster was a great cook, and she made probably the best pancakes in the history of pancakes. I'm saying better than Bob Evans, better than IHOP, better than the Waffle House, pancakes out of this world. And so when I was a kid, sometimes I wanted her to make those pancakes. And so here's what I would do. I would go into the kitchen. I would stand at the stove and I would wait. And I figured if I stand here and wait, she eventually will come in and make me pancakes. And my grandma Foster, she was a little bit more of a straight arrow in the way that she communicated. And she basically said, "Boy, what you up here doing? Standing here is not going to get me up to make your ass any pancakes. So here's what we're going to do." And I think I was maybe about 10 or 11 when we got to this point. Yes, I was a little old to be that stubborn, but that's for another discussion. She said, "I'm going to teach you how to make the pancakes. I know you're not going to make them as good as I do, but if you really want them and you don't want to wait for me, you'll at least know how to do it." And so she took me and, it was a couple of lessons for me to catch on, but walked me through how she made them. And she didn't use measurements. So that was always tricky in making them myself. But she taught me how so that anytime I wanted to make pancakes and I didn't want to wait for her to come into the kitchen and make them for me, I did have that opportunity. So you're probably thinking, well, what the hell does your grandma Foster pancakes and how good they were, and you standing at a stove have to do with lobbying? Actually, everything. So one of the problems that organizations, corporations, advocacy groups, unions, governmental bodies that are, let's say you're a municipality and you're lobbying state or federal government for resources or support or projects, etc. Most lobbying and lobbyists are reactive. They wait on the legislature or the executive branch or particular agencies to come up with the legislation or the administrative rules or the funding and appropriations or executive orders to then start taking action. In a sense, they're young Eric standing in the kitchen at the stove waiting on my grandma to come in and make pancakes. In this case, my grandma is a governor, a president, a mayor, a city council I mean, not city council, but a city council body, a state legislature, Congress, a county commission, a board of supervisors, a board of trustees, town councilors, city commissioners, an any agency, be it if it's planning, economic development, health and human services, Department of Defense, Department of Education, be it at a federal or state level. Those are emblematic of my grandma. So the approach that most of you who buy lobbying services gets is you get your lobbyist and you being young Eric waiting at the stove in the kitchen for your grandma to come make you pancakes. That's not going to get you made pancakes. You have to change your approach, which means you have to become proactive. In a sense, you have to be taught how to make your own pancakes. That's the approach we take. And, I interweave a lot of my own life lessons into the work that I do, be it here at Banks and Company or with other entities that I work with and have worked with over the years. But a big part of it is you don't wait for actions to happen. If you want something to happen, you need to make that thing happen. If you're hungry and you want pancakes, you need to know how to make pancakes and make them so you can eat them and don't get sick. Taking that analogy and playing it to this reality, if you want a law passed, or you want a law amended, or you want a law defeated, if you want funding for appropriations, or you don't want funding for appropriations in a certain way, because it might be negative based on your objectives. If you want an agency to create certain rules or take certain actions, if you want the executive, be it the mayor, the governor, the county executive, the superintendent of a school district, to take a certain executive action, instead of waiting at the stove for them to come in and make you pancakes, you need to make the pancakes and make a plate of pancakes for them. You need a lobbyist and a lobbying approach that will actually take proactive steps, that will sit down with you, that will find out what is it that you're trying to accomplish. How do we turn that into actual tangible appropriative action, which is both the authorization for how we're going to spend the money and the checkbook, which is when we fund the money, the appropriations. Is going to take administrative rules or executive order action in the in the executive branch, because agencies sit in an executive branch unless they're independent agencies, and or legislative statutory laws that have to be passed. Take someone that can take your ideas, that can sit with you, help you understand which lane of government they fit within, who does the particular work in terms of that governmental entity to achieve your goal, and then puts in the recipes for the pancakes. Ergo, can draft what the legislation needs to look like, can draft what the appropriations needs to look like, can draft what the executive orders or administrative rules can be, and can then work that for you. That's the way that you get change. In a sense, that's the way that you get fed. And that's the way that you feed your grandma, or in this case, you feed the governmental body to do the things that you're trying to achieve. Waiting on action to take place is what has been a detriment to so many organizations that are really fighting and working for good things out here, be it if it's minority business chambers, if it's advocates in food and product safety, in clean energy, environmental regulations, etc. waiting on someone to come in and make you the pancakes, waiting on the body to make decisions, and then based on those decisions, then you're going to try to react. That's not going to get you your outcome. But ultimately, what will get you your outcome is the approach that we take at Banks and Company. We will make the pancakes for you and for the entities that you're trying to work with, and the different recipes. If it needs to be blueberry for appropriations, if it needs to be strawberry for executive, or if it just needs to be plain with syrup like I like them. I used to like butter, but I can't eat butter because it upsets my stomach. For legislative, we can then customize it to make it work for you. But ultimately, if you want to get fed, it has to be proactive. If you want government to work, you have to have either in your team or hiring a company like ours to actually take what you want, turn it into proactive legislation, boilerplate appropriations, administrative rules, or executive order packaging, and sell it to the elected officials and the other stakeholders to achieve the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. Waiting at the stove like little Eric did won't get you fed. Waiting on an executive order or something to happen or legislation to be introduced won't get you fed. So, if you're interested in having somebody that knows how to make the pancakes for you in terms of public policy and can be proactive and go after achieving your outcomes versus waiting and then reacting, please visit us at Banks and Company. You can email me at eric@bankscompany.us, or you can visit our website, www.bankscompany.us, or you can email our CEO, Lloyd Banks, at Lloyd, LLOYD, at bankscompany.us. Let's go out and make these pancakes. Let's not stand at the stove anymore waiting on somebody else to make them. Let's make them and then serve them to everybody we need to serve pancakes to. Thank you. Have a blessed day.